because last time we did it to a computer, it was hard for the other people to share it, I think.
Fine. I'm fine with that. Okay, so we're going to start, even though people will be continuing to join, I'm sure. This is our second presentation by Dr. Baruch Sterman. We're very pleased to have him again. It's a continuation of the first on Tekhelet. It's really timely as they found some purple linen in an archaeological site in Israel. And so it's really very exciting. And he is the director and co-founder of Ptil Tekhelet. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to the mitzvah techelet. And he's written a book called The Rarest Blue, which details the history and science with the biblical blue dye, some of which we talked about last time, and he's going to take it further this time. So I think we can start. And,
thank you very much. And I hope you all can hear me okay. I never know with Zoom how it works. I think we're okay, right?
Yep.
Good. Okay. The topic that I'm going to be speaking about today is Tekhelet Mordechai and the Bigdei Kehuna. So it really is very timely. Shoshanat Yaakov Tzahara v'Samecha Birotam Yachad Tekhelet Mordechai Freilichin Shushan Purim to everyone. I don't know how many people have a Shushan Purim in America, but here in Israel, it's actually a big thing, especially if you're in Yerushalayim. We're not in Yerushalayim. I look out my window in Efrat here, I can actually see on a clear day the walls of the old city from our house. Now that puts me in the really interesting, precarious position because I am what's called by the Gemara, I am nire ve'eno samuch. I can see Yerushalayim, but I'm not close to Yerushalayim. And that's a kind of a machloket on whether or not we keep Shushan Purim or we don't keep Shushan Purim. We're always machmir here, so you have to have a little bit of schnapps in the morning just to be yotze if you live in Efrat. But anyway, in Yerushalayim this year, of course, very, very strange. We had 3 days of Purim anyway. We're not even going to get into that at all. But I do want to say that it's not only Shushan Purim, but it's Motza'ei Parshas Tetzaveh, and we find ourselves Truma Tetzaveh, Vayakel Pekudei, my favorite parshiot that have to do with the Mishkan and have to do with the Bigdei Kehuna, the tabernacle, the portable Beit HaMikdash, and the clothes that the Kohen used to wear. So instead of starting with the song Shoshanat Yaakov, I'm going to start with a different song. Emet ma ne'edar haya Kohen Gadol. How wonderful it would have been to see the Kohen Gadol in his beautiful clothes. And I just pulled out a machzor from Yom Kippur, Yom Kippurim, right? So I guess there's another connection. If you look at the piyut, at the beautiful song that we sing, Ma ne'edar haya Kohen Gadol, how beautiful, how glorious was the high priest. And we read what we read, but there's a little, on the bottom, there's the one that said, there's something that says Yesh Mosifim. So we read about 20 different types of things that rhyme or that go according to the Aleph, but actually we go from Aleph all the way to Kaf. And then everybody moves on. You've had enough of that song. But there are some additional parts to the song because it really went all the way from Aleph to Taf. So some of the additional ones is, here we have, Ma ne'edar kilevush Meil. The Kohen Gadol, when he wore his beautiful Meil, the robe, and another one, Kipa'amonei Zahav B'Shulei HaMeil, like the little golden bells that hung from the robe of the Kohen Gadol. Ma ne'edar haya Mareh Kohen Kehila, and this is my favorite, of course, Kehila Mechusa Techelet Ve'argaman. The entire congregation, whether that means the Kohanim or everyone who was adorned and wearing Techelet and Argaman, Techelet, the beautiful sky blue that, of course, we know from the Bigdei Kehuna, and we'll talk a lot about that in a few minutes, that also was worn by every single Jew on their tzitzit, Ptil Techelet, V'natnu al tzitzit hakanaf Ptil Techelet. Everybody was commanded to wear that one strand of techelet, which essentially meant that everybody was wearing Bigdei Kehuna, everybody was wearing the garb of the Kohen, and every single Jew is a Kohen. God tells us that the Jewish people will be a nation of priests, and every priest wears this special garb of a priest. And so the special garb that every Jew would wear was this one strand of techelet. But not only techelet, also argaman. Argaman comes from the same family of sea creatures, the chilazon. We talked about that the last time we were here. Beautiful example of a chilazon, a snail, and we believe that this was the source not only of techelet but also of argaman. And we spoke about last time the difference in how you get techelet and argaman, but both were very, very, very expensive, worth 20 times their weight in gold at one point. Argaman, the purple. Let's see if I have a little, here. I have a little argaman and a little bit of techelet. I don't know how well it'll come out on Zoom, but I don't know if you can see the difference here in my right hand, or what you're looking at here is argaman. It's a little bit more purple. And on the other hand, you have techelet, which is more sky blue. Both of them come from the same snail. And the differences we've seen in a previous lecture had to do with how they're processed. One is put into the sun, one is not. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that later. I'm not sure. Okay. What I really like to concentrate now is on the Bigdei Kehuna. And hopefully it'll have something a little bit to do with Purim as well. And strangely enough, there are actually halachot that we learn and implement to this very, very day that are learned from the Bigdei Kehuna, from the garb of the Kohen Gadol, and specifically the Meil, the robe. So let's talk for a second about the Meil. First of all, let's backtrack. The regular Kohen wore 4 garments. The michnas, his pants, right? Then he wore a ketonet, some kind of a robe that he wore over on top of his body. An avnate was a belt, which he wore. And we, according to the Gemara in Yoma, we paskin like Rebbe, that the avnate was made out of techelet also. So he wore this sash or a belt, kind of a belt made out of techelet, and he wore a hat, a big bat. Okay, those were the 4, and they were all white again, except for the avnate. So he's pretty much michnesei badil bashal b'saro. He's wearing this linen, all linen. Then the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, on top of those clothes, wore 4 more begadim. He wore the Meil. The Meil is a robe, and it was made all of techelet, kalil techelet, all completely techelet, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. On top of that, he wore an ephod, which was kind of a vest. Attached to the vest was the choshen mishpat, the choshen, which had the breastplate and all of the stones, the magnificent gems arranged as 4 rows of 3 each to symbolize the 12 tribes of Israel. And then on top of that, he had kind of on his forehead a diadem, which was hung from his forehead with a Ptil techelet, the Tzitzis. And if you get reminded of something when you hear about Tzitzis and Ptil techelet, that's probably not a coincidence. So what I'd like to focus on right now is the Meil. And that's what we're mainly going to be speaking about. The Meil of the Kohen Gadol. Let me share my screen. How did the Meil look? You know, it's so hard on Zoom because if I was asking this question, I would expect everybody to answer me. How did it look? Share screen. Okay. Feel free to jump in if you want to have any if you have any comments or any questions or anything like that. There are a number of. Can everybody see this? You have 3. Just raise your hand if you can see it.
Yeah, we can see
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
We're good.
So there are a couple of different opinions as to how the Meil looked. The opinion I would say that most people are familiar with is the one here all the way on the right. That's the opinion of Rashi, and Rashi felt it looked like some kind of I don't know, maybe like a robe or a long dress with sleeves. Very important. That's what Rashi believed. and fine. Okay, so that's Rashi's opinion. But the opinion of the Rambam is very, very different. According to the Rambam, and here it's not clear exactly what the Rambam meant, especially around the shoulder, but the middle version that we see here is the Rambam according to the Ralbag, and it looks like the Meil is a poncho, essentially. And you put it on over your head, just like you, just like you would, it would come down on both sides, in front of you and in back of you. And similar, but not exactly, is the Rambam's opinion according to the Radvaz, which is, you can't really see it, but it's essentially the same kind of a thing, but it's side to side. The slit goes up the front and down the back. Instead of the slit going on the two sides, the slit goes along the front and the back, and it's attached slightly under the arms. And in both cases, of course, the Rambam does not have any sleeves. But either way, whether you say that it's, that the slit goes along the front or the slit goes along the sides, the Radvaz asks a fascinating question based on this, especially if you look at the middle one, like, it looks like a poncho. What it really looks like, if you see this, it looks kind of like a really long talis katan, right? Like a pair of tzitzis, but really long, right? But the Radvaz, of course, based on this, asks the obvious question. If this is what the Meil looked like and it had four corners, then it should have had tzitzit on it. It's a very, very interesting question. The Radvaz has an answer. Other people have other answers. Maybe just one small idea that the Ketav Kabbalah of Mecklenburg says, which is such a beautiful idea that I have to say it, even though I'm not quite sure if I would adopt this as the correct, or if I would say that this is the answer. But along the bottom of the Meil, you had 72 pa'amonim v'rimonim, bells, golden bells, and pomegranates. Pomegranates, and it's not exactly clear at all what we're talking about. We believe, or many people believe, that that it looked maybe something like this, right? You had a golden bell, and that bell could make, chime. It had a little hammer anvil in the middle of it. And as you walked, it would bang against the outside and make a beautiful, beautiful noise. And the pomegranates were made of three types of wool, Tekhelet, argaman, and Torah shani. And they're arranged in these tiny little balls. And here you can see, this is actually, we've tried to be involved in making the Meil and making the pomegranates as well with the techelet that we get from our snails, our murex snails. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few moments. Says Mecklenburg, the bells would remind the Kohen, as soon as he started walking, it would remind the Kohen and everyone around the Kohen Gadol who heard these beautiful bells. It would remind them of the Kohen doing his work, doing his avodah, doing his service in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Mishkan, in the temple. It would essentially remind the Kohen and everybody around that the purpose of them being there and their whole purpose altogether had to do with serving God and serving and doing his services and doing his mitzvot. Well, that kind of reminds you, in a sense, of exactly what the tzitzit are there. Temoto, they're going to look at them and remember all of the mitzvot, remember God. So says Mecklenburg, the Kohen on his Meil didn't need to have the visual cue of the tzitzit because he had the audio cue of these bells that were chiming away. Beautiful idea. I want to step back a second. I just mentioned something that we are making a Meil. That's not actually something I realize for me to say that. That's kind of not something that's out of the ordinary. But if I don't think most people are involved in making actually the Bigdei Kehuna for the Beit HaMikdash. So let me just explain that for a few seconds. We are the people who make techelet from Murex trunculus. And when you need a tremendous amount of techelet, the people who you're going to come to is Ptil Tekhelet, our organization. And so, for example, when Machon HaMikdash, which is involved in making the clothes for the Kohanim and for the Kohen Gadol, when they needed techelet, they came to us and we were able to provide them with techelet. And once we were making one me'il, we decided that we were going to make two. We have a me'il that's in Machon HaMikdash and another one that was made. This is Yehudit Abrams, who is a master weaver, an Olah from America, from San Francisco. And she is a fantastic artisan. Isha Chachmat Lev, she would have been in the Mishkan. And she is making the techelet, as you can see here. She's using the techelet to weave a me'il. And this is what the me'il looks like. This is ours, we have it. And hopefully when the Kohen Gadol comes, he'll be able to have our me'il or the me'il at Machon Mikdash, either one, whichever he wants. This me'il, as you can see, is according to the Shita of the Rambam. It's a poncho, essentially. We're also making another one, which will be according to the Shita of Rashi. So depending on whether Mashiach is a Sephardi or an Ashkenazi, we'll hopefully have it covered on both sides. Now, just again to point out something, techelet at one point was worth 20 times its weight in gold. This me'il weighs about 2.5 kilos. So I didn't look today, but gold, the price of gold has skyrocketed over the last years. I think we're about $60, $70, $80 a gram. So you're talking about, to make a me'il, it would have taken anywhere from, let's be on the low side, let's say that the Beit HaMikdash got a discount, maybe 10% off of their techelet. So you're talking about anywhere from $2 to $4 million for the me'il. $2 to $4 million for the me'il. And of course, what happens if the Kohen Gadol was a little bit careless one day and spritzed a little bit of the blood of the chatat on his me'il? And what's he going to do? He has to clean it, right? The Kohen Gadol's bigadim don't get cleaned. If they get dirty, they get put aside and the new ones are made. So you can imagine what was going on in the Beit HaMikdash in terms of the awesome amount of, I don't know how to say, affluence or luxury, or that's not the right word, because again, we'll see in a few moments that it wasn't really about, necessarily the class or the or what it would mean as far as the Kohen Gadol's stature personally. But when the Torah tells us last week in this past parsha, when the Torah tells us, Asita Bigdei Aaron lechavod u'litifaret, for honor and for splendor. So it really means that. These were absolutely stupendous. That's the price that you would put on the Bigdei Kehuna. The gems and the gold, and especially the techelet, was just something that was really not to be equaled. And so it's not surprising that the Medrash, when it talks about kelim mikelim shonim, right, that we read in the Megillah, that Achashverosh used the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash. The Medrash there says, and Achashverosh in that feast wanted to show how he was indeed the greatest king in the world and the greatest king that ever lived. And so he came out in that feast actually wearing the begadim of the Kohen Gadol. Now, whether or not that happened, it's more important that that's what the Medrash believed happened. And so the idea that the Medrash is pushing here is that even the king of all 127 countries of the world could look to the clothes of the Kohen Gadol as those that were the most important and the most beautiful. Okay, let's hold on to that for a second, and I want to make sure that I have time. I have till 5, till 5:15? What, till 10 or till 10:15? How long do I have?
I think you can go to 10:15. It's fine.
Okay.
If
I just want to make
people-
sure that I get everything.
We're recording this, so if people need to drop off, they can come back.
Okay, so edit that part out that I just said. Now, how do we, let's go back into the details and the halacha of the halachot, the laws of the Meil. And in order to do that, we're going to need to take a little bit of a detour for a few seconds and get into a very arcane argument, a machloket in the Gemara, about making techelet. How do you produce techelet? So I actually, I put in the comments. Maybe you could repost them again. I put in the comments some Mareh Mekomot, some places that that you can look at. I'm going to show them to you on the screen. So if you don't have them, that's perfectly fine, because I'm going to show them with you. But I did put them in the comments, and we'll post them again. And that way we'll be able to see them together again. So let's find these sources that I'd like to look at. And the first source is a Gemara in Menachot. So we're talking about Menachot Mem Beis. The Gemara says, Amar le Abaye Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda. Okay, now we're talking about how you make techelet. So Rav Abaye, famous Abaye, who says to Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, how do you guys make techelet? Well, why didn't Abaye, who was a very smart man, why didn't he know how to make techelet? Well, the answer is simple. Our snail lives in the Mediterranean Ocean, and it was only along the Mediterranean coast where they made techelet. Of course, Abaye lives in Bavel, 1,000 kilometers away. So Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, who is what's called a nechuta, he goes back and forth from Eretz Israel to Bavel. He comes to Bavel, and the first thing that Abaye says, he grabs him, he says, well, how do you guys make techelet over there? Amar le, so Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda said to him, Maitinan dam chilazon. We take a secretion that comes out of the chilazon, visamanim, and chemicals, uraminan lo biyora, we put them all in a vat, umar techinan le, we boil it all up. Okay, so far, so good. Okay, now, in fact, what I'm going to do now, and let's see if this works. Of course, you never know. But what I'm going to do now is to see if we can actually see exactly what Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda is talking about. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take the first stage in the dyeing process is to add the glands from the Murex trunculus sea snail. We break the shell. Okay, one second. So can everybody see what's going on here now? Show me. Do you see the video that I'm playing? Beautiful. So we take some glands from the Murex trunculus sea snail. I have them in a little bag. We put them in our yora, which is for our purposes a beaker. They're dried. We took our snails, broke them open, pulled a little gland out. That gland was yellow, but it turned purple very, very quickly, a very, very dark purple, and it's a powder now coming out of this bag. We put that into our beaker. Then we're going to add a little bit of water. I'm just jumping ahead. I can show it to you. So we're going to add a little bit of water to that, some hot water. That's always an important point, just like Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda said. And now, as you can see, the water is completely clear. That's because our dye does not dissolve in water. So what we're going to have to do, and what Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda mentioned, is not only do we have to take the secretion that comes out of the snail, but we are going to need chemicals. And we are going to put in a couple of chemicals. First chemical that we use is a very, very strong base. The second chemical that we use is, for any of you who are chemists out there, a very strong reducing agent. It's called sodium dithionite. In the ancient world, they would have done this by fermentation. So when Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda says we boil it all up, he's talking about a very long process. Pliny the Elder, who talks about this process, says it may have taken as much as 2 weeks to get to this point where we get to right now, very, very quickly, with this very strong reducing agent. And as you can see, the solution now is turning this kind of a bright yellow. Okay, that is the most important thing that I needed to show you at this point. We've got now our chemicals, and our chemicals here are giving you this yellow kind of a solution. Beautiful. We're ready to dip our wool. And that's what we're going to do here. I'm just going to show you it very quickly. There's not really so much that's exciting here, but we're basically going to be dipping our wool into the solution, just that you know from this moment on, and we'll talk about this very, very much. Everything has to be done l'shem mitzvah tzitzit, with the express intent and purpose of only making tzitzit. We're dipping our wool into this solution. And just so that everybody remembers, it's at this point when we're in our yellow solution. It's only in this point when we can expose it to sunlight. And once we expose it to sunlight, very nice. When we take it out, it's going to, now that exposure to sunlight changes it from purple to blue, but you don't see it because it's all yellow. Now, this is an important point, and we'll talk about this in a moment. Notice that the solution is this kind of yellow-green. It'll be dark green at some points, but it is not purple and it is not blue. All of the things that are going on chemically inside of here, when you expose it to sunlight and it changes from its molecular components, it'll be purple to blue. You cannot see that until you take it out of solution. And now watch very carefully, okay? When you take it out of solution and you bring it into the air, then it'll slowly turn to its final color. If this was done inside, instead of in my front yard, which is in the bright Mediterranean sun, if I had done this inside, what I would be getting now is a beautiful purple. But instead, because I did this whole thing outside in the sun, I'm getting this blue. But again, you cannot notice that until you take the wool out and expose it to sunlight. And then as it gets oxidized, it's going to turn this magnificent blue, really, really something, literally something to behold, because it's just beautiful. Okay, back again. Now, Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, let's go back to our Gemara. Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda is telling all of these things to Abaye. And now he comes upon a problem. And here, I need you, as they say in on Shtisel to Haltkap, we're going to need to be very, we're going to need to understand something which is not simple to understand, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. I'm back. Let me share again. I'm back to Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda in Menachot. Okay, so we boiled it up. We did all the things that we had to do, put all the chemicals in, and now we're ready to dip the wool. However, then we do this very strange ritual. V'shakilna purta bebeata. We spill a little bit of the liquid out into an eggshell. Vita aminan la beudra, and we taste it, or we test it is really the better translation, with a little bit of wool. Vishadinan le lehahu beata, then we throw away the egg, vikalinan le leudra, and we burn the wool. What's going on? What is Shmuel Bar Yehuda telling us? All kinds of voodoo. But actually, what he's telling us is actually a pretty straightforward idea. You have to test the vat. According to Pliny, as I mentioned before, this could have taken up to 2 weeks to get to the point where the dye would be ready, this whole concoction. So for 2 weeks, you were sitting there. You had thousands, tens of thousands of snails that you collected painstakingly over how many weeks or how many months. And now you're ready to do your dyeing, and you do the dyeing and you put everything in, and it's taking 2 weeks. But you have a very, very small window. If you take the dye too early, if you put the wool into the dye too early, it's not going to be in its reduced state, and it's not going to be ready. If you wait too long, then the whole mixture is going to get spoiled and you're going to have to throw it out. So you're constantly testing the dye to see if it's ready. But how do you test it? Because remember, it's all this yellow kind of greenish stuff, right? So you don't know if it's going to be purple, if it's going to be blue, if it's going to dye at all. The only way you can know is if you dip wool and take the wool out, and then you look at that wool. But here we have a problem. And that's the halachic problem, not the scientific problem. If you were Pliny the Elder in Rome, doing your experiments, you'd be testing away, dipping and looking at the, at the wool every 5 minutes. But you're not Pliny the Elder, a Roman. You are a Shmuel Bar Yehuda, a techelet maker, according to the halacha, mahadrin, and you have to have, of course, all the hashgachos, and somebody standing over your shoulder and looking at you all the time and saying, no, 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 you are not allowed to dip. And we'll see that in a second. So what do? You can't dip the wool into the vat, and we'll talk about why in just a second. Shmuel Bar Yehuda tells us. So what do you have to do? You have to spill it out into the equivalent of a paper cup, which in those days was eggshell. You take that, you spill it out into the eggshell, dip some wool into the eggshell, test it to see if the dye is ready, and then, and only then, you'll know whether the rest of the dye is ready, but you have not touched the rest of the dye yet. And so this eggshell and the dye that's in the eggshell and the wool that you dip to test it, terrible. Burn them, throw them out. Shma minatra. Now, says the Gemara, it goes on to say, we can learn from Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda's words 3 things. It's actually 2 things. And we're not going to skip, we'll skip a little bit. We'll just get to the most important things. Te'ima pasula, the dipping of the dye and the wool that you're using to test the dye is unacceptable for Bigdei Kehuna, for techelet, for tzitzit, absolutely unacceptable. And that's why you have to throw it away or burn it. And shma mina debe'inan tzvia lishma. You have to have the dyeing and the dipping of the wool only for the most express purpose of Bigdei Kehuna, of the clothes of the Kohen Gadol, or maybe of the tzitzit. And last but not least, te'ima pasla, dipping wool into the vat is going to invalidate the entire vat. You dip 1 thread of wool to test it into a vat of 50 gallons of snails that you've painstakingly collected over the last 3 months, right? And you dip 1 tiny little thread into that vat, the entire vat has to be thrown away, at least as far as techelet is concerned. Use it for something else, but not for techelet, for tzitzit. Okay, now, and here I just want to get into the last part of this. And again, I know that this is arcane, and why is he talking about all this silliness? But it's actually, I think, it tells you very, very important things about, and we'll see, I hope, about techelet of tzitzit, and also about the Meil and how they're connected. All of this that we said about dipping in the eggshells and not dipping into the vat. God forbid you should put 1 tiny little thread into the big giant vat. Kitanai. This is actually an argument amongst Tanaim. Now, te'ima pasula. What we just said about the fact that testing invalidates everything and that is not allowed. Why? Mishum shene'emar, in our parsha, just in Parsha Tetzaveh, by the Meil, kalil techelet. It is completely techelet. I'm going to translate kalil right now as through and through, 100% techelet. This is the opinion of Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel. However, someone argues with him by the name of Rav Yochanan ben Dehavai, and he says, no, that's okay. You're allowed to dip. Mareh Sheni sheba kosher. And now I'm going to introduce this term, Mareh Sheni, which we will translate as double dipping. Double dipping, the second mareh, the second appearance is actually the technical term, but really what he's talking about is double dipping. Mareh Sheni, double dipping is perfectly fine. Mishum shene'emar ushni tolad. Okay, so crimson the third of the trio of expensive fabrics that were used in the Beit HaMikdash. Tekhelet, of course, we spoke about. That's the blue. Argaman is the purple. And then there's the crimson. It comes from a worm, the tolat, and it's called tolat shani. Shani is red or crimson. Crimson, same word, from the beetle that produces this red dye. Says Rav Yochanan ben Dehavai. I'm going to play with my words here because I'm a Tana and I can do that. And and what he says is, don't say Ushani Tolat Shani, which is red, Tolat Shani, but no, say Sheni. Sheni means second. Oh, says Rav Yochanan ben Dehavai. It says this word Shin Nun Yud Sheni in the pasuk. I'm going to take that to mean two. So you can dip as many times as you want. You can dip, and the second time is perfectly fine. Okay, so let me just get back to what's going on and do a little bit of a recap. And now I hope it'll get a little bit better now. You've got this crazy machloket here. Are you allowed to dip twice or not? Well, the person who says you're not allowed to dip twice, why? Because it says klil techelet. How do you learn from that it's completely techelet? Of course it's completely techelet. No matter how many times you dipped, it's still completely techelet. It all comes from the snail. And then you have this Rav Yochanan ben Dehavai who's saying, no, it says sheni in the pasuk, so therefore you're allowed to dip twice. I'd like to move on with this idea and tell you that it gets even worse in a sense, because the machloket goes on even in understanding what it means to do this double dipping. This is a giant machloket between Tosfot and Rashi. Tosfot says, well, why aren't you allowed to do the dipping? And when we mentioned it, it seems clear from this, because you need to have, and I've said it so many times, you need to have the express purpose. We say every morning when we go to our techelet factory, Kol ma she'eseh hayom l'shem mitzvah tzitzit l'shem mitzvah techelet. Anything I do today is for the express purpose of the mitzvah of tzitzit. So when I dip the wool, or when I do the shizirah, spin my wheels or twist the threads, everything has the express purpose. So the dyeing, as we've seen, needs to have the express purpose of the mitzvah, whether it's Bigdei Kehuna or tzitzit. So says Tosfot, okay, but if I dipped my wool because I want to test the dye, that's not for any purpose of tzitzit, that's unacceptable. But what if I want to dip my wool into a vat and I take it out and everybody goes, wow, because they see it change before their eyes and all of the wool now is beautiful blue. And I put that wool aside, everybody's happy, I can make tzitzit with it. What if I take now another tuft of white wool and put it into the same vat, and with the same kavanah and with the mashkiach in front of me say, yes, I now have kavanah in this second batch of wool to put it into to put it in for the right reasons and all the kavanot, l'shem yuchad kudsha b'richu, everything, as much as I could possibly want. So says Tosfot, I'm going to share with you again, that's not a problem. Look at what Tosfot says here, right? That the whole point is that you have to have the Havila Lishma. The only problem is if you don't do it for the correct reasons. But, however, Tzarich Lomar. But what I believe, says Tosfot, that afilu mea pa'amim lishma kasher. If I've dipped the second time with kavanah, the first time I took my first batch of wool and I put it in and it was b'kavanah, and the second batch of wool, if I put it in, also b'kavanah, and the third batch and the fourth batch and the fifth batch, that's fine. Afilu mea pa'amim. Rashi has a different understanding. He understands the words klil techelet to mean something different. Kol techelet be'inan. We need all of the power of the chilazon, all of the power of the chilazon, kol ikar mareh chilazon, has to go in to the tzemer. Shelo yeh davar acher tzavua ba. Nothing else can be dipped with it. So one tiny little dip of one little thread, somehow or another, you've lost the power of that snail juice, and that's not good enough, and therefore throw it away. Now, Tosfot understood Rashi the same exact way that I said. Perish Bekuntras, he says, Rashi says, Shelo yehei davar acher tzavua ba. You're not allowed to dip anything but the wool that you use for your tzitzit or you use for your garments of the Kohen. Everything else, if you put one other thing into it, if you dipped into it one tiny little thread for something else, you've pulled out the potency, the mojo, the power of the of that snail, and throw it away. This is a great machloket, and okay, everybody's entitled to their opinion. Rashi's entitled to his opinion that you need to have all of that power and essence of the snail, and even one tiny little thing, if you put it in, is going to invalidate the entire pot. Tosfot, and it's also the opinion of the Rambam, their opinion is, you know what? That's not what the Gemara is talking about. The Gemara is talking about intention. And if you have the right intention once, twice, three times, fine, beautiful, no problem. Everyone believed this to be a machloket, Rashi and Tosfot. For 600 years, 700 years, there's not anybody of all of the Rishonim and the Achronim, I'll be honest with you, not too many people cared about this machloket. It wasn't really anything that anybody knew about because nobody was making techelet. Until the first person who actually made techelet had to come along and make all kinds of trouble and turn this entire machloket on its head. And who was that? The great Radziner Rebbe. I'm not going to get into the Radziner Rebbe and his quest for techelet, but one thing is amazing about the Radziner Rebbe is that he knew everything about everything that had to do with techelet. So he knew and he made techelet. Again, we don't believe that the source of his techelet, his chilazon, which was kind of squid, we don't believe, and Rav Herzog didn't believe, and most people don't believe today that that was the authentic source of techelet. But one thing he did know, halacha. He knew all the Gemaras and all the halachot. And he also knew about dyeing, because he did it with his own hands. So he comes along and he says, there's only one possible way that Rashi could make sense. What does that mean? The full power of the dye. When I talk about the power of a dye, or the power or the essence of the source of the dye, there's only one possible thing that I could mean. And what is that? It's color. That's the only thing it could possibly mean. Comes along the Radziner Rebbe and says, you know what? When Tosfot came along and said, Rashi meant you couldn't have anything else dipped into the dye, Tosfot didn't really understand what Rashi was saying. Because it's perfectly fine to have something else that dips into the dye so long as it doesn't weaken the color. I'm jumping down here. Are we still on share? I hope we are. Yeah, we are. So, Rav Gershon Henechleiner, when Rashi says the problem, the deficiency of this double dipping of Marat Seva is only when it comes to the way that the color comes out. So if I were to dip into the wool, into the dye, and then the next dipping would be less beautiful, less, less deep, less of a hue. The color would be faded or not as brilliant. That would be a problem. However, says the Rebbe again, who knew how to dye because he used to dye all the time. But I see b'tzeva chama, with hot dye, near bechush, my eyes, I can see with my own eyes, she'eino moshech v'kolei tatzeva b'pam harishona. Not all of the dye is absorbed in the first dipping. Ve'afilu b'pam shniya v'shlishit, even the second and the third time. The resultant color is yafeh v'chazaka k'pam harishona. It's as beautiful and brilliant and as gorgeous as the first time. Lo huchatam harita klal. It is not faded in any way, and there is no possible difference that you could discern with respect to the color between the first dip and the second dip and the third dip. Is there anyone on this Zoom call or in the world who could possibly say that that is not techelet through and through? Yafeh. And so the Radziner Rebbe paskin l'halacha, double dipping is perfectly fine, triple dipping is perfectly fine, up until the point where you start to notice that the dye is less brilliant or less colorful. The Radziner Hasidim today, who still do their dyeing with their squids, paskin according to the Radziner, and according to the great Rebbe Gershon Henoch, who lived 150 years ago, but they still, of course, keep not only his recipe, but all of his piskei halachot, all of his decisions. And to this day, Radziner Hasidim dye in that manner. We at Ptil Techelet do not accept that. Rav Tevger, who is the founder of our organization and the first person to ever use a Murex snail to actually dye techelet on the beaches of the northern coast of Israel, 1987, through tremendous effort, trial and error, he was able to actually dye the first strings of techelet. He wrote a book, Klil Techelet, which explains all of the different halachot of techelet. Fantastic Talmid Chacham and a great, great person. And he, with all due respect to the Radziner Rebbe, believed that there is another way of understanding this machloket about double dipping. And the best way to explain that is basically, I think, to look at a medrash actually about Klil Techelet, but not about this week's parsha. This is going to be in Bamidbar. Bamidbar, it says, Ba'aron. You know, when they used to travel so that the kelim of the Mishkan, so that all of the different vessels in the Mishkan wouldn't get dirty, they would cover them, of course. They're walking through the desert, a lot of dust. You don't want the dust to collect on top of the mizbeach or on top of the shulchan or the menorah. So they were covered, and they were covered with beautiful garments, right? The aron was covered with a cloth made of techelet. And that is the only other place in all of Tanakh where the phrase Klil Techelet is used. By our Meil, remember? It says, Vasita Meil, Klil Techelet, all through and through Techelet. The other place where it says Klil Techelet is by the covering of the ark, the Holy Ark. So why the Medrash says, why by the Aron it says Klil Techelet, but not by any other of the vessels? Because Sheu Chashuv Mikol Klei HaMishkan, it is more important, more prestigious than all of the other vessels in the tabernacle in the Beit HaMikdash. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Shloshak Tarim Heim. Rabbi Shimon says there are three crowns: Keter Torah, Keter Kehuna. Many people have heard this medrash. The Keter Malchut. There are three crowns: the crown of Torah, the crown of Kehuna, of priesthood, and the crown of Malchut, the crown of kingship. And so the Medrash goes on, and we've heard this, that this idea, not everybody is born a Kohen. Some people are born to be a Kohen. So the Keter Kehuna, the crown of the priest, is something that only a very few can hope to achieve and hope to attain. Not everybody is born into kingship. Not everybody can be a king. And so the crown of the king is something that only a very few can attain. But Keter Torah, if you work hard and you study, anybody can wear that crown. The reason why I pointed out this medrash is because Rabbi Shimon is playing with a word, Klil Techelet. So I've interpreted Klil as meaning through and through. But there is another meaning of the word, and you say it every single Shabbat. Klil Tiferet Berosho Natata. When we talk about on Shabbat, a splendorous Tiferet, right? A splendorous crown you put on his head. This is talking about Moshe. So the word Klil can also mean a crown, which means Keter Malchut, the crown of Malchut. And with this, I want to explain the way Rav Tevger understands this machloket. Techelet represents kingship. It represents the highest form of royalty in this world, which is the kingdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The mamlacha, the mamlechet that we're talking about is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God is Melech Malchei Amlachim, the ultimate king, the king of kings, the king of the universe. And when we're talking about the king of the universe, to the Jew, that means the representation of that in color is Tekhelet. The Sphira, for example, in Kabbalah, the sphere of Malchut, all the spheres are associated with colors, says Moshe Cordovero in one of his famous books on the Kabbalah on Jewish mysticism. Of course, Malchut, what is that represented by? Tekhelet. The Ramban in this week's parsha, let me see if I can jump into it for just a second. You know what? I won't even. Yeah, you know what? Let me jump into it quickly. The Ramban in Parsha Tetzaveh says on the Bigdei Kehuna, lechavod uletifaret. Here do I have it? I have it right here. In Shmot, right? When it says lechavod uletiferet, why am I in Shmot Kaf? Now I'm all lost. No, how did I get here? We don't want to be here. We want to be in Tetzaveh. How do I jump to Tetzaveh? Another review. No, I'm in Mishpatim. Sorry about this. I wasn't going to do this, and I did it, and you never should jump. V'asita et me'il ephod klil techelet. Right before that says, as we start the parsha, in Parsha Tetzaveh, V'asita bigdei kodesh li'aron achicha lechavod u'teferet. The Bigdei Kodesh, the Bigdei Kehuna, the garments that were made for Aaron, for the high priest, were made lechavod u'teferet, for honor and for splendor. Says the Ramban, Ki eile habegadim levushei malchut hein. The begadim of the Kohen Gadol, the Tekhelet, and he goes on and on to say that. The begadim of the Kohen Gadol were Bigdei Malchut. They were the begadim that represented God's kingship in the world. Says Rav Tevger, if that's the case, that Tekhelet has to be 100% royalty, only something fit for a king can be used for Tekhelet. You don't serve a king leftovers. So when Rashi came along and said, you need the full potency of the snail, what he meant is only those first drops of dye, the first dipping of the dye, that's what's going to be acceptable if you want to make Tekhelet for the King of Kings. It's not only that the Tekhelet is royal, but the Tekhelet that you make for the Bigdei Kehuna and for the tzitzit has to be the most royal and the most fitting of all. It's similar to the fact that you only use the first few drops of oil that comes out of the olive for the oil for the menorah, for the candelabra. Molecularly, there's not much of a difference between the first drop and the third drop of the oil that comes out of the olive. And molecularly, maybe the Radziner is right. Maybe there's no possible way that you could tell the difference between the first time you dipped and the second time you dipped and the third time you dipped. But there is something about the prestige of that first pristine dip that's going to go to the king. And so that is what Rashi says the full potency needs to be there. And therefore, in our organization, we differ from the Radziner, and we never dip twice. We use our techelet, we dip once. If it doesn't work, then we'll prepare an entirely new vat and dip a second time, but only with brand new dye and only with that techelet represents the malchut of God on this planet, on this world, is alluded to in another medrash. The medrash says, and it's actually a halacha that many people keep, in the morning of Tisha B'Av, we don't wear a talit. Says the medrash in Eicha, why don't you wear a talit? Because when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, the medrash says, there was a part of God's kingship that was rent, and God's talit, so to speak, ote or kasalma, note shamayim kayriya. The sky is God's talit. And says the medrash in Eicha, when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, the beautiful blue sky turned to clouds as if God were saying, I'm ripping my talit. And so to this day, many people don't wear a talit on Tisha B'Av as a remembrance, in remembrance of that midrash. And that idea that some part of God's kingship was hidden away, if you will, when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. And in some way, equivalently, since techelet represents the kingship, the malchut of God in this world, then some part of techelet was hidden away as well. And maybe that's the way to understand. A lot of people say that techelet nignaz, techelet was hidden away. And the Ari HaKadosh said, when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, techelet was hidden away. And we don't have techelet today. What he must have meant, he had to have meant this, because techelet was still around for 500 years after the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. But he had to mean that some part of the mitzvah of techelet, some part of the significance of God's kingship, which is what techelet represents in this world, is somehow or another diminished when there's no temple, when there's no geula. And I'd like to end with one absolutely amazing Dvar Torah, if you will, from the Satmar Rav. The original Satmar Rebbe, Rav Yomosh Teitelbaum. And what I'm going to show you now, and promise me that no one will show it to any of the Satmar Hasidim, because this is one of the most incredible Zionist Divrei Torah that I've ever seen. And if the Satmar Rebbe knew that I was using it in that context, he would probably not be very happy. I hope you can see it. We're talking here about the Shilas and Shuvos, the Yoel, Yomosh Teitelbaum, Yeridei Simin Mem Dalet. The Satmar Rav asks, Ubimea Purim, right? He asks an interesting question. We say, as I started, Shoshanat Yaakov Tzahala V'Samecha Bir'otam Yachat Tekhelet Mordechai. How wonderful the Jewish people must have felt, and how happy they were when they saw the techelet of Mordechai, when Mordechai walked out. Mordechai yatsa b'levush malchut techelet v'argaman. Mordechai yatsa milifnei hamelech. Right. So when Mordechai wears this beautiful garb of techelet, all the Jews are happy. Well, says the Satmar Rav, that's why they were happy. They just were saved from annihilation. That wasn't enough. Mordechai and Esther are now the top in the entire echelon of all of Persia. That's not enough. The only thing that could make them happy is when they look and they see techelet. Doesn't make any sense, does it? But he says, no, I'll explain it to you. You see, he says it must have been that when the Jews went into exile, into Babylonia, that halo techelet bisman, right? So they had no techelet. This is what he says. Li nire, that bisman galutam, in the time of the exile in Babylonia, lo haya lahem techelet. They had no techelet to wear. The Jews were wearing white on their tzitzit. They weren't wearing techelet. Ela she'az. But then, b'yeshua shehaya lahem al yedei Mordechai ve'Esther, with the salvation that began by the hands of Mordechai and Esther. Listen to these words. Haya atchalta de geula mamash. This was the beginning of the redemption. Anybody know where the phrase atchalta de geula is used and applied to today? Just look at any of Rav Kook's writings. So when Mordechai and Esther and their salvation took place, the Jews believed that this was the beginning of the ultimate redemption, and they would be coming back to Eretz Yisrael, and they were sure, B'shana acheret itchilu livnot haBeit HaMikdash, they were sure that very, very soon they would be able to build the Beit HaMikdash, and therefore, says the Satmarav, U'lechein hevinu mima shelavash Mordechai Tekhelet, because Mordechai re-established the idea of Jews wearing techelet. Higia eit dodim v'sharei shamayim ptuchim legeulatan Yisrael umizeh haya simchatan rabah. One might be able to say that the re-establishment of the mitzvah of techelet is an harbinger of the atchalta de geula. It means, at least it meant in the times of Purim and Mordechai and Esther, that the reestablishment, rediscovery of techelet, and people once again wearing techelet on their talit, maybe Mordechai, but maybe all of the Jews, is a symbol of the redemption, that it's becoming close, it's coming near, and we can only hope and pray that the salvation that happened in the time of Purim once again is happening now, and that in our days, the Atchalta de Geula, the beginning, the first flowering of the redemption of our people, and all of its manifestations and in every way possible, is something that is symbolized and foreshadowed, if you will, by the return to the state of Israel, the return to Israel, and in our days, hopefully, with the establishment of Tekhelet and with our Meil, should we all be Zoche one day to see the Kohen Gadol, whether he's an Ashkenazi or a Sephardi, we'll take whichever it is, wearing whichever Meil he wants, whether it's Rashi's Shita or the Rambam's Shita, with tzitzit or without tzitzit, chiming and dancing to the songs of the Leviim in the Beit HaMikdash, B'meira, B'yameinu. Amen.
Amen.
Wow. Thank you so much, Baruch. I noticed you didn't, or could you talk about, shortly after, let me go back. Hi, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. If you joined a little bit late, Congregation Beth Medrash welcomes you. I see a lot of names I don't recognize, so I think there's a lot of guests. I'm guessing from Baruch. Baruch might have invited, or some of you might have invited some other people to join us, which is great. Baruch, you didn't talk about the find in Israel yet, which must have been mind-blowing for you.
It was absolutely amazing. It was absolutely amazing. There have been very few, you can imagine, to find any kind of garment, any kind of fabric that's more than 100 years old is ridiculously rare in archaeological terms. To find something 1,000 years old or 2,000 years old is almost impossible. This find that they found at Timnah was 3,000 years old. And it was made with our snail. Again, there are ways to actually test to see if this is our snail or if it's not. This particular cloth that they found at Timnah, which is again 3,000 years old, just to put it in context, this is the time of David HaMelech. David HaMelech was about 1000 BCE, Shlomo his son 950. And so we're talking about something from the time of David HaMelech. And it's purple, again, dyed with our snail. It's still extremely, extremely important as a find, even though it's not blue. There was something that was found and actually analyzed by Nama Sukenik, the scientist who did this, who did the analysis of this Timnah find. She found, or she did the analysis on something that was found in Wadi Morbat in the desert, kind of just east of Malei Adumim. There are some caves there, Those caves were inhabited by Bar Kokhba. This is only 2,000 years old, not 3,000 years old. But there was a little piece of fabric that was found and also examined by Nama, and that was blue. So we have blue shellfish dyed in Eretz Israel. We have purple shellfish dyed, 2,000 years old, 3,000 years old. And this is a fascinating, fascinating thing that we can find. It means that the technology for dyeing with these snails existed in Eretz Israel, in our area, all throughout the time of Tanakh, all throughout the time of the Mishnah and the Talmud. And so it's a very, very important indication, hard to say proof, I'm going to be scientific, but it's very, very important indication that these snails were used in those times for argaman and for techelet. It actually also says something interesting. It tells us, when the find came out a few years ago from the Wadi Murbat cave of this blue fabric that's 2,000 years old and was dyed with our snail. So people said, oh, you know what? There must be some process. They didn't know how to make techelet in those days from snails because the blue issue, remember, it was only exposing it to the sun at a very, very specific stage. So the ancient dyers could not have known that. They weren't as smart as we are. Many people say this. I don't believe them. I think they were way smarter than we were. But the ancient dyers, they were ancient. So they couldn't have understood how to make blue. They could have only understood how to make purple. What do you do when you find a blue fabric from 2,000 years ago? So it's not the ancients that now are the people who look foolish, but it's the people who say that the ancients were foolish who look foolish. But what is the answer that we've heard many, many times? You don't understand. There's some process that we don't know about, which will turn purple into blue over thousands of years. So when you find this piece from Timna, which is 1,000 years predating the blue fabric that was found, and it's still absolutely beautiful purple, then that idea that there are some processes that will turn purple into blue over thousands of years doesn't make any sense anymore. So this is a very, very important find. Anything that shows that techelet, argaman, was being used in the ancient world, dyed with these snails, is an incredible piece, another brick in the wall of evidence that leads one to believe that these snails, the Murex trunculus and the other Murex snails, were the source of the ancient techelet called the chilazon by the Talmud.
I also have to wonder, I understand your explanation of dyeing, dipping once as opposed to many times, but it seems such a waste of an expensive resource to not use it for things like there was a market for this. Did they use the leftover dye for other less Kodesh purposes? Like they must have been able to sell that kind of dyed cloth anywhere. Did they really just dump it out? I can't imagine that.
I think that you're right, and I'll tell you a couple of things, and then I'm going to tell you a secret, but you have to promise not to tell anybody else.
We're recording this, so I don't know what to tell you.
The first point is you're 100% correct. They would have used the second dippings, and they would have sold it. And how do I know that? Because there is in the Talmud, in the Gemara, it speaks about if you find hamotzi techelet bashuk, if you find techelet on the street, okay, I mean, you'd be very, very lucky. It's like finding a diamond on the street, but let's say you did. Are you allowed to use it? So the Gemara says, no, you can't. Why? Because you can't be sure if it was dyed Lishma or not, if it was dyed for the express purpose of tzitzit or not, which means that they were dyeing techelet for other purposes as well. Now, it could be that this is talking about some Romans that were dyeing techelet, or it just could be that this was the Jews who were dyeing techelet with a second dip and the third dip and for that. So I'm quite sure that the Phoenicians for sure, but also the Jews, if there was a way that they could squeeze another dollar out of this vat, they would have figured it out. But remember, we had this machloket, and I'm sorry that I tortured you to go through this terrible machloket between Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yochanan ben Davai, and your heads are going to be spinning all night. But the Razina Rebbe believes dipping multiple times is perfectly fine. Tosfot and the Rambam believe that dipping multiple times is perfectly fine. We are very, very, very machmir. And I have to admit, we're very, very machmir. Not everybody is. And one person who is not specifically with respect to the Bigdei Kehuna happens to be Rav Ariel, the head of Machon HaMikdash. So Rav Ariel actually said to us, dip away a second time and give me all of that second dipping, and that's what we'll make the me'il of the Kohen Gadol from. So the actual me'il that we have and the me'il that's in Machon HaMikdash is actually made from second dipped techelet. And as you can see, it's still very, very beautiful. It's still, you couldn't tell the difference, just like the Radziner said. It wasn't only his cuttlefish and squid that could be dyed 2 or 3 times before you see any difference. Ours as well. So what we do is we take that second dipping and we'll use it for other things when we can. Which is actually, if you think about it, it's a little ironic that the whole idea of Mareh Sheni we learned out of Techelet from the Bigdei Kehuna, and yet we for tzitzit will not use the second dip, and for the Bigdei Kehuna they will use the second dip. At least that's according to Rav Ariel. One day, please God, Mashiach will come, and along with him the Kohen Gadol. Now there's 2 possibilities. Either the Kohen Gadol will say, I am perfectly happy with Mareh Sheni. I paskin like the Rambam and Tosfot, so I'm perfectly happy with that. And then he'll wear the begadim and happy. The other possibility is he'll say, excuse me, I paskin like Rabbi Tevger and like Rashi, and so this me'il is something that I will not wear. In which case, we'll have to scramble very, very quickly to make him another me'il. Okay, that's okay. What would have been far worse is if we would have spent the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of snails to make first dipping for the Kohen Gadol, and he would come and say to us, why did you do that? I would have been perfectly happy with Mareh Sheni. So at least we have a me'il. We have a good possibility that, at least according to many poskim, that me'il is going to be perfectly happy and fine. And if not,
wow, it's mind-boggling to think about the work that goes into making this, because of that you have to go through, like how this gland is so small in the snail, and the painstaking work it must take to get this out is kind of.
And today we have fishermen all over the coast of all over the coasts in Europe who work with us to collect our snails. And those fishermen hire scuba divers to help collect the snails and put them into the baskets that they use. So, and we're pretty okay if you think about it. It's still tremendously painstaking. Every single snail is broken open one by one, but collecting these thousands and thousands of snails is an enormous amount of work. But imagine what must have gone into it in previous in the generations, 1,500 or 2,000 years ago, 1,500, 2,000 years ago. This was the job of who knows how many thousands and thousands of people who would spend their year, their month going out and collecting the snails, go out on a boat, you dip the baited basket into the, into the water and come back a couple of days later and pick it up. Very, very, very difficult work. And so you can imagine why preparing the vat was like an amazing thing. You prepare this for weeks and weeks and weeks, if not months. Again, remember, the snail has to be broken open. The Gemara tells us about this, and so do the Greek and Roman scientists. The snail has to be broken open and the gland taken out of it only while it's alive. So you can't be storing up all of these glands for months. You can store the snails alive, but then there's going to be one big mitzvah, as they would say here, one big giant activity where you're going to get everybody in the village is going to come down and break open the snails on snail breaking day, which is once every 3 or 4 or 5 months, right? Everybody's going to be doing it, pulling out the glands, stuff, and then You wait for 2 weeks and the entire village is going to be looking, with bated breath and wondering, is it going to work this time? Is it not going to work this time? I remember some old man would say, that you needed to pour in a little bit of salt and we forgot to do it, or too much or too little, and it worked or it didn't work. It must be dancing and holiday and whole snail fest and who knows what. Maybe I'm getting a little carried away, but.
No, I appreciate it because you were saying it had to ferment naturally and they didn't know exactly, they didn't have the science we have to understand, but the effort that they had to go into, they didn't have scuba divers that had,
Right.
air and they can dive down and find them. There is a question from Yitzhak about what happens now with the oil spill on the Israel coast. Is it making the snails pasul? Is it affecting them? Is it getting to the floor?
It's actually very interesting. The oil spill along the coast, the government came out a few days ago, and said that they're banning all seafood that's caught along the coast of Israel, the northern coast of Israel, the coasts of Israel. That doesn't affect us at all because we don't get our snails from Israel because they were banned. The Nature Authority here in Israel has banned the catching of snails forever. You've never been allowed to catch snails, or actually, you're not allowed to take anything out of the coastal waters unless you have a permit, and no permit was ever given to our snails. The one exception that was made was when we first started our work back in the early 1990s, and we took out a bunch of snails, made our first techelet. But then we wanted to make another batch of techelet. But again, it was against the law, it was illegal. So what we did is we went to the then president of Israel, Chaim Herzog, and we went to him and we said, your father, of Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, wrote a doctorate in 1914 about techelet. There's no one who loved techelet more than your father. And we are following in his footsteps and carrying out his work. Is there any way that you can help us use a little protectia and get a some kind of a permit to take snails out of the water? He made a couple of calls and we got a permit to take out 900 snails from the coastal waters. 900 snails is a lot of snails as far as the snails are concerned. As far as techelet is concerned, it's a drop in the ocean. So This was good. We were able to make a few sets, maybe 10, 20 sets of techelet. But we realized right there and then that we would never be able to commercially make techelet for Am Yisrael if we relied on taking snails out of the ocean. So we went and searched. We found a place in Greece where we started getting our snails from. Then we moved to Spain. We worked with a group of people in Spain, fishermen who helped us get snails out of the ocean, and we worked with them and broke open the snails and brought that back from Spain. And lo and behold, and we're talking about the late 90s, there was an oil spill off the southern coast of Spain, and the Spanish government banned all seafood exports from Spain. So then we were caught, and there was a number of months, maybe even a year, where we were not getting our snails. From that time on, we vowed never to be caught with our snails down. And so we always keep now a stock of at least 2 years worth of dye from the snails. Wow. So that if, God forbid, we're ever in this situation, we'll be able to regroup, not have our production affected in any way, but at least we'll be able to regroup and find some other place that we can get snails from. And like I said today, mainly off the Adriatic coast, Croatia, Greece, Italy, Spain. Those areas are where we get our snails today from.
And also having more than one source, having more than one set of fishermen also helps. So there's a couple of questions. I think, well, he's saying, will it make it pasul? But they're not getting their, so Yitzhak, he's saying they're not taking their snails from Israel.
No, you don't have to get them from Israel. Listen, Yechezkel talks about Tekhelet Me'iyeh Elisha, which was Cyprus. Okay.
So I'm not sure, Yitzhak, how, if they're not taking is, yes, I guess oil spills would spoil snails because they're not letting people take seafood or things out of the water. So I'm not.
Well, I'm wondering if Yitzhak is wondering if we don't get them from Israel, is that a problem with the snails? And no, I'm saying that that's not the case. We know that in the ancient
world, and
right. where they got
Okay.
snails from all over the Mediterranean.
I'm
was true.
going to read you Raphael Jason Heck's question, because you might want to read it yourself. Slightly off topic to Mareh Sheni. Tzitzis needs to be dyed Lishma. Do other gardens such as the Meil need to be dyed Lishma? Which I think you said yes. If so, how can it accept Mareh Sheni dipping when the first dip was used for a completely different purpose?
I think that that's an excellent question, and probably you would have to ask Rav Ariel to understand his understanding. I think that what Rav Ariel potentially is meaning is that that you're doing it l'shem mitzvah, and you can have like a generic, I'm doing this for the intent express purpose. It's an interesting question. Wearing tzitzit, is it one mitzvah or two mitzvot? Is it one mitzvah of wearing white and blue, or is it two mitzvot, wearing white and wearing blue? Two different mitzvot. This kind of schizophrenia is apparent in the entire Parakat Tekhelet, all of the Gemara that talks about the issues of Tekhelet. You have this kind of attention the whole time of, is it one mitzvah or is it two mitzvot? Right, and so many things fall into place once you understand that the Gemara is not sure, right? Do you make one bracha? Do you make two brachot? All different kinds of questions. We had this question about dipping our threads because do we have to say this is for the mitzvah of Tekhelet, or were we okay if we just said it was for the mitzvah of tzitzit? And when you're spinning the threads, you have to say this is for the express mitzvah of techelet, or maybe of tzitzit, or maybe of both. If you were just making techelet threads, that would be perfectly fine. But you know that the Rambam's opinion is that half of a thread is white and half of a thread is techelet. So there you are spinning half a thread, and some of it is white and some of it is techelet. So there's no way around this problem. If you say this is for the express mitzvah of techelet, and there's two different mitzvot, and you left out the mitzvah of tzitzit part. And if you say this is for the mitzvah of tzitzit, but there's another, but you forgot the techelet part. So there's nothing you can do. And we were in this kind of a conundrum. We went to Rav Shabtai Rappaport and asked for what should we do here? So Rav Rappaport said, it's okay if you say this is for the mitzvah of tzitzit, and it's for the mitzvah of techelet, and it should be for a mitzvah. Whatever it is, it should be for the mitzvah. It's like that old, Hasidic / Karbach song about the shepherd who said, I'm just going to say the Aleph Bet, and God, you put those words together however you feel like. So we say it's for this mitzvah, that mitzvah, it's for any mitzvah that we want to do with this, but we have in mind that it's for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for God, for his mitzvot. And Rav Rappaport felt that's enough. Rafi, maybe that's the answer as well. When they were making their techelet and dipping their wool, they would say, if the Kohen Gadol wants his techelet, it should be for the Kohen Gadol. If it's only going to be for the Kohen Hedyot, beautiful, we're happy with that. And if it's just going to be for some guy who's going to wear his techelet on his tzitzit, happy about that too. We're making techelet, and any way that wants to be used afterwards, hopefully God will accept it. Maybe that's the answer to Rav Ariel. I don't know. But it's good. It's a better question than an answer. I'll give you that.
There's a question also from one of our more scientific members, Dr. Alan Appel. He wants to know, is the reaction with the Sunlight reversible?
No. There is a molecule. There are three molecules that are inside of the snail. Indigo, which as you well know is a blue molecule. Anybody wearing jeans knows that. Indigo is the basis of jeans. But the snail adds a little twist, and it puts one bromine atom or two bromine atoms onto the indigo. And indigo is blue, but monobromo indigo with one bromine atom or dibromo indigo with two bromine atoms is purple. So the mixture that you get when it comes out of the snail is going to be a mixture of those three things, a little bit of blue, a little bit of purple, which gives you a purple color. When you expose the solution of these three molecules when they are in their reduced state and slightly weakened, I would call it, although that's kind of a little bit of a misnomer. But when they're slightly weakened, you can expose them to the radiation, the ultraviolet radiation in the sun, and that will add enough energy to dissociate the 2 bromine atoms, or the 1 bromine atom. And what you're left with then is indigo. So you're left predominantly with indigo. I just want to point out, you will never, ever be able to completely debrominate the solution. There will always be little traces of mono and dibromo indigo in there. And that's why when Nama Sukenik looked under her HPLC and analyzed the chemical makeup of the blue cloth from Wadi Murbat, she was able to know conclusively that it came from a snail blue, even though it was indigo, and in theory, it could have come from a plant, right? But she knew that because she found traces of dibromo and monobromo indigo, which only come from a snail. But regardless of that, when you take those bromine atoms off and they evaporate out of the solution, you're never going to get them back into the molecule. So once blue, always blue. And always. What do I mean by always? 2,000 years. The Rambam says, Omedet biyofya velo tishtaneh. It stays steadfast in its beauty and it never changes. And, to paraphrase Yoda, if after 2,000 years I look as good as the Tekhelet from the Morbad caves, or 3,000 years like the purple from Timna, I'll be quite happy.
So Yitzhak asked another question. He might not have been here for your first session with us. This is something I know that you talked about in your first session, and I believe our recording is posted on our website for anyone who wants to go back and watch it, where Baruch talked about the mitzvah of tzitzit, but Yitzhak's question is just white tzitzit. Is it a complete mitzvah or not, because it's missing the techelet for the Ptil techelet? So
very, very quickly, I'll just say very, very quickly.
Okay.
The good news is I'm not a rabbi, so anything I say has zero halachic validity. So take that not just with a grain of salt, but with lots of grains of sand. However, having said that, there is an argument here going on. And that argument is between Rabbi Yossi HaGalili. These are Tanaim. These are the greatest of our greats. The argument is, what do I do if I only have white? If I only have white? Rabbi Yossi HaGalili says, Emein techelet mevi lavan. If you don't have techelet, what are you going to do? And wear white. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was of a different opinion. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, techelet ma'akevet halavan. If you don't have techelet, do not wear tzitzis at all. That's if you don't have techelet. Most people would say that if you do have techelet, but for whatever reason you choose, let's just say you don't have a reason, you just decide, you know what, I don't want to do it. I know it's a mitzvah. I believe this is real techelet. I know I should wear it, but I don't want to. Well, then that would be the same in a sense as if you'd said, I know that I should wear tzitzit, but I don't feel like it. I'm too hot, right? And you would be in the same situation of not having performed a commandment that the Bible and God wants you to fulfill. But having said that, that's only if you believe that this is real techelet, and it's only if you believe that you are commanded to wear techelet. There are those who say, and there are many, many great rabbis today, there are many great rabbis who say you should wear techelet. There are many great rabbis who say, even if you don't wear techelet, don't wear tzitzit altogether. But there are many, many, many great rabbis today who say, no, I'm sorry, I don't go along with this. For whatever reason, I'm not going to say that there is an absolute chiyuv, there's an absolute obligation to wear this techelet, and they have their reasons. And so if somebody doesn't wear techelet on their talit, I would still allow them to get an aliyah on Shabbat and make kiddush and be yotzei with them. At least that's my opinion.
Right. But of course, one of the things that your organization does is creates Ptil techelet for tzitzit. We see behind you all the different versions of tying them.
Oh, yeah.
And on your demo here. And so I know that when we got to be in Israel, hopefully again soon, God willing, when we were in Israel 2 summers ago, I know my husband bought Tekhelet in Jerusalem and I believe for my son as well. So I know they started wearing, but Baruch feels so strongly about, if I remember, that you won't wear tzitzit without Tekhelet. Now, personally,
No.
if you don't happen to have your talit, but you said that was your personal choice. So anyway, this has been, again,
And I just
quite
want to
fascinating.
end with one. First of all, I want to thank you again, not just for having me, but for having me twice. That's really as they say, you're
Well,
that's really too much. It's really wonderful to speak to your congregation again. And let me just say one little thing. If you everybody wears a uniform. Everybody wears a uniform. You pretend that you don't wear a uniform, you're wearing a uniform. It's making a statement about yourself. You're not going to wear, something that's associated with a different group, and you're not nobody's ever going to wear anything that doesn't reflect somehow about something that they want to, that means something to them, or that they, feel is representative of their context. When you put on something that represents royalty, it works the other way as well. It's not just that you're saying I identify with royalty, but it's taking something royal. If you wear it, it's going to affect the way you are. It's going to affect your service, I believe, of Hashem, of God. It's going to affect your tefillah, but it's also going to affect the way you act. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we all acted a little bit more regal in the way we talk, in the way we act, and in the way we interact with other people? If we treated them as royalty and we treated ourselves with respect and didn't do all the, the things that we do because we're not necessarily sure of who we are and what we are. I think that techelet can change a person. So it's not just about wearing it because you identify with the mitzvah. It's making the mitzvah change your identity a little bit.
Oops, I'm on mute. Well, there's a few people writing now. Amen. We pray every day Shema Yisrael. And it's written Ptil Tekhelet. I believe it's about integrity you do when you act the mitzvah as you pray. When you say you act the mitzvah as you pray. So, and then someone else wrote Amen. And yes, so, well, this has been fascinating. Again, thank you for the more in-depth learning. That was great, especially on the gloomy, rainy day we're having here.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sure it's not gloomy nor rainy there today. I hope.
Not today.
You should already have flowers blossoming. Thank you.
We got
so
snow
much.
last week. Okay.
And
thank you.
we're going to put this recording actually on our website, although I will see if we can also send it out, as I had told someone, to the people on this. So if you want to watch it again, or if you know people who had to leave early. Beautiful. Well, Chag Shushan Purim Sameach. If you're
thank you.
Purim,
and now it's time to get ready for Pesach.
I know. I know people who've already started cleaning.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Thank you so much.